Emotions are high here in Ferguson because of what happened. The people are tired. People all over America are tired how cops kill and beat innocent people for no reason. This is what we have to look forward to all over the place.
I'm here, I'm putting my life on the line for my people. I'm putting my life around for everybody in this country. I believe in equality.
We have a right to assemble.
And why the cops says we can't be out here? Like you said, we have a right to assemble.
Martial laws.
Our rights are
the one authority of police every day. They have complete domain over us. They are like gods. If they tell you not to do something, you cannot do it. And if you do, they will treat you like a dog. You will be shot down. Well, at least for a black man. I'm not sure for everybody, but I do understand that. I hope it's not like that for everybody. It shouldn't be. It should not be like that for any human being to live on this planet. We from the same blood. We are from the same descendants. There's no way one person can tell us, or one small amount of people tell us what and what we cannot do. There's something as an actual people being unity. That's not something we cannot happen at all. At all.
My brother! My brother! My brother! My brother! My brother! We are! My brother! We are! My brother! We are! My brother! We are! My brother! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Hands up! 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 Don't shoot! Hands up!
I'm with Racial Justice Now, which is a local community-based organization based here in Dayton. My co-founder is a retired emeritus professor of law from this university, Vernelia Randall. I'm here today to speak both as a parent and activist and make some connections between what's happening in our country with regards to Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Renisha McBride, Trayvon Martin. I mean, the list literally goes on and on. And between my husband and I, we have 5 children together. We have 2 boys and 3 girls. My son Amir was how I even got involved as a parent activist, working on these issues. And the connection is, and for me, I'm speaking from my lived experience, so I don't have a bunch of fancy slides that I could share with everybody and a bunch of data, you know, that we all get tired of seeing. But I think it's important that everybody here hears from someone who has lived this experience, having an African-American son. My son was identified at 3 years old in a preschool as a troublemaker. He was viewed already as a little criminal. And I had to begin to go to bat for him and to act and to become an activist to defend him, even at 3 years old. When we say this thing is systemic, it is. It literally starts with our children, with our sons when they're babies, literally. His experience in school and then my stepson has been the same. You know, when they enter school, most of the time, and don't take this as an offense. I just want to put this out here for white people, okay? Because I'm not going to be, you know, sugarcoating anything today. So I hope that your feelings don't get hurt, but I can't concentrate on that. So I want to kind of put that out there as a disclaimer right now. But most of the teachers that our sons are facing are middle-class white women. And many of these women are afraid, literally, of our babies. They look at them and they view them as little criminals. They put them in remedial classes, they recommend them for suspensions, they recommend them for medication, they recommend them for all kinds of things that our children don't need. And that's how I started out, you know, being an activist for my son. I refused to allow the school to label him. I refused to allow them to tell me that he was the one who had the problem. I'm a part of the national organization as well, or my organization, Racial Justice Now, is a part of the Dignity in Schools campaign, and we're a national campaign fighting this thing, pushing back against school push-out, pushing back against criminalization of youth, African-American boys in particular. We're in LA, New York, Mississippi. This is a national epidemic, and we're working to change policies and state laws across this country. I'm proud to say that we have worked very well with Dayton Public Schools, where my son is a student, and where most of the children in this county, most of the African American children in this county attend school. Dayton Public Schools has approximately 15,000 students. Around 66% of them are African American. Dayton Public Schools, yes, even with an African American superintendent and African Americans on the school board, is guilty of the school to prison pipeline, is guilty of pushing our young children, not just our boys, but even our young African American girls out of school. Out of school suspensions and racial disparity is an issue in Dayton Public Schools, but I am happy to say that because of the campaign that Professor Randall and others have helped us with from the community, we have had them help them change their student code of conduct. As a result of our moratorium campaign, we've worked with them to incorporate positive school behavior supports, restorative justice programs that would all deal with school discipline in a more holistic way instead of dealing with it in a punitive way where we have, you know, this attitude of just get out. Many of our children are already facing obstacles when it comes to statewide tests. We have asked the school district to ban a moratorium all out of school suspensions for grades preschool through 3rd grade. They agreed to the preschool. We're still working on the rest of them. This state has a 3rd grade reading guarantee, and we're tying that in with our young people needing to learn to read. We don't need children out of school for issues that really simple training and classroom management skills for teachers could help alleviate. Another thing that we're working on is at the state level. We're working with some of our state legislators to bring this thing all across the state. Ohio is very unique. We have 8 urban school districts in this state, and this issue is not just a Dayton Public School issue. We're seeing horrible numbers from Akron, Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo, and others. And so we're trying to do this thing in a community way where we're working as parents and community activists with the school systems, with our state legislators to deal with implicit bias. That's what killed Michael Brown. That's what killed Trayvon Martin, is this fear and lack of humanity when we see African American boys and African American children, period. When we view them as less than human, as savages, as thugs. We literally look at, some of us look at babies and we think, oh, a future criminal. That's an issue. We've got to begin to deal with how all of us look at our children. The implicit bias study by Harvard University has found that about 80% of white people have an implicit bias against African Americans, and 30% of African Americans have an implicit bias of other African Americans. So this is an issue, and this is something that we have to deal with in a real way, not just dealing with it in the law. I mean, that could help, but I think that if the law were the answer, then we wouldn't have this problem after 1964 Civil Rights Law. We wouldn't have this problem after the 1866 Civil Rights Law. I mean, we keep trying to handle this thing in the courtrooms, and we really need to try to handle this in better ways, and dealing with educating ourselves, really dealing with and checking our implicit bias, dealing with our education system, dealing with some of the lies that are taught in history classes, you know, all across this country. And I think that's a place that we can start. I see a hand up back there.
Yeah, I'd like you to expand a little bit on the obstacles that you claim are in the standardized tests. What obstacles are you guys? What obstacles were you talking about in the standardized tests that are limiting what you're talking about?
I think what I was trying to really get at there is that if some of the children aren't doing well on this test, they're definitely not going to do well, and we continue to suspend them with out-of-school suspensions, and they're not actually in the classroom able to learn the material that they need to know to take the test.
So you're insinuating that white...
Hey. So...
No. I'm very respectful.
No.
You said that most of your students were being taught by white, middle-aged white people.
No, I said middle class
I'm
white
sorry,
women.
middle class.
That's a fact.
Okay, and so they are disproportionately limiting black students versus white students as far as standardized tests.
I think you're stretching it there. I think that the issue is actually much larger, and I think and if you want, I can actually point you in the right direction to a study that was just completed recently that shows where the majority of teachers, white middle-class teachers, do recommend, I live this, recommend young black students to remedial classes. They are less likely to recommend them for gifted classes. They are more likely to say that they need to be on medication and recommend them, to the school psychologist. They're more likely to do all of these things that actually inhibit the educational process for many of our children.
They're standardized tests.
But they have a cultural bias.
The end result of all that discrimination that happens in the classroom with blaming a black kid for the same thing that a white kid does more harshly, that adversely affects your ability to learn the material that we featured on the standardized test.
That's completely
That makes sense?
false.
Well, particularly if the person is suspended, particularly if they're suspended on a regular basis, they're not in the classroom to learn. Particularly if they're expelled and expended 3 days out, 6 days out, 15 days out, they're not there to learn what all the other children are learning. They don't have that same opportunity of time to get the knowledge that will prepare them to take the test that supposedly determines their future, whether they go on to the next grade or not, when in reality it also determines how many jails they build.
But I know a lot of this is really hard to accept, and it's hard to really deal with. But think about how hard it is for me to accept and really deal with, sending my child to school and having to worry about him being misdiagnosed, being mislabeled, because his behavior and his learning style is different. The learning styles of our children are different, and most of the time within the American education system, it doesn't, except for Montessori, with the exception of Montessori, it doesn't allow for the child to move. It doesn't allow for the child to be engaged and to be kinesthetically maneuvering their materials that they're learning from. And that's a problem specifically with my son and with many African American boys. They like to move. They learn by manipulating things. And most of the time in the classrooms, that's just not what's happening. As a parent and visiting many classrooms in this district and before he was in this district, I've noticed that that's the setup. That's, it's not geared for that particular learning style. And this is not about necessarily an attack on teachers, because I think, teachers do have a lot to deal with too, even when it comes to standardized tests. They have to always teach to the test. They have to always teach to, whatever company says this is what we need to know now. I think Common Core is the new thing now. And that has its own problems. We won't get into that today. But the problem is the implicit bias, the way we view African American children in this country, the way we view African American boys in this country has got to change if we care as a nation, whether their lives mean anything. It's not just the police. We have white vigilantes, killing people like Bernicia McBride in Michigan. So it's just not white police officers. It's white people, period, feel like they have this right to kill. Literally just take a person's life. And I think when and this is my opinion, I think that what we're dealing with is the attitude and the way we view these people, is they're less deserving of life. They're less
The police
deserving,
officer who shot dead an unarmed teenager in the U.S. town of Fergusonn has been named. The death caused public outrage, and subsequent rallies met a strong response from the authorities. And Zakiya Sankara-Jabar reports from the latest protest.
In Fergusonn, in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, protesters are continuing to come out onto the street, calling for justice in the case of the killing of 18-year-old unarmed Michael Brown. The name of the police officer behind the killing has been released. Darren Wilson, he's 28 years old. He is white, and we do know that he has been kept in a safe place by police here ever since the shooting took place. Earlier we spoke with one of the attorneys of Michael Brown's family, and this is what he told about the information that's being released by the police.
Just a name, that's all we have. And that's it. There's a lot more we need to learn about him, especially as it relates to his actions after he shot Michael and before he shot Michael. Those things are crucial to determining what happened.
We spoke to some people about this latest information.
I'm kind of confused with their goal is. Like, that information being released today,
Okay, I'm
with
not
the
sure
name,
exactly,
kind of wanted all the information.
But I do know that as far
Before
as the
things
implicit
got to
bias
this level.
Initially, I was afraid to come out here because when I saw all the militia, the police out here presenting threatening weapons and just presenting themselves in a threatening manner, I was afraid to come out here because when I saw the tear gas and the manner that they were approaching and arresting people.
The atmosphere here has certainly shifted somewhat because in the first 4 nights what we saw were pretty violent clashes between mostly a very heavily militarized police who were using tear gas and rubber bullets.
People still don't understand why this young man had to be killed by multiple gunshots by a police officer being completely unarmed on the day of his death.
The protests in Fergusonn have led to some criminal groups taking the opportunity to loot local shops. Some people formed lines to protect businesses. Protesters claim the police aggression against the rallies is out of proportion. The use of tear gas in Ferguson sparked a somewhat unexpected online response from across the Atlantic, with Palestinians taking to Twitter advising protesters not to wash their eyes if they are hit with tear gas, and also urging them to try to keep calm and to avoid running into the wind. Now, tear gas can have severe health effects. They include temporary blindness, breathing problems, miscarriages, as well as heart and liver damage. But tear gas is not the only tool used by police to counter mostly peaceful rallies in Ferguson. And every full rifle is the security forces' arsenal weapon used in various military conflicts. Police have also been reinforced by light armored vehicles, which were in service in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq. And if that's not enough, an MK-11 sniper rifle, also used in combat, was seen as necessary to tackle the peaceful rallies. Law enforcement expert John Whitehead believes the police are overreacting.
A number of studies show that once you put on that gear as a policeman and you're trained, you start acting like a military unit, like you're in a patrol. And unfortunately, what happens is the psychology changes, and a lot of these local policemen, when they're approaching a house for a SWAT team raid, it's like they're moving in on Al-Qaeda. Supposedly, we're the masters and they're the servants. But in Ferguson, they're telling people to back off 25 feet, get in this zone. They're violating their free speech rights. You have a right to walk up to a civil servant and say, "Sir, why are you doing this? Why are you here?" They're pointing guns at people and chasing them away. That's not a policeman anymore.
That's not how you love and
That's what we're
support a
dealing with.
child.
Most police
So if
agencies
that's what's
operate
happening
basically any way they want. The
you might be
local
speaking to an
city
audience
councils and
of
politicians
future
just let them
young
go.
white educators, early childhood,
I've
right
written in
now.
a number of instances.
So
I've
I need
seen
to let it be known,
local
what I
citizens
hear
get
and
down at that local
how
city
I'm
council
bound
meeting,
when
they
I'm
get
in that
their
position
signs
to
and they
say,
say, "We're not
well, if
moving
I bring up
until you change
race
this
in the
thing."
middle of a
If
school
not,
day,
you're going to see tyranny
when
in
I'm
this country.
substituting and I have a
This is
co-teacher
the
with
face
me,
of the government
what kind
today.
of,
What you're seeing in
that disrupts the
Ferguson,
whole day,
it's
and
only
then
going
I
to
get in
get
trouble
worse
with my
if we
job, she
don't
gets in
back it
trouble with
off.
her job. Race is blocked from being talked about, and productive solutions to race are blocked from being talked about within the school because they're taught to see it as race blind. Oh, I have a kid acting out. It doesn't matter if he's black and 5 other kids in my class are black and I'm disciplining all of them differently than my other kid. So I mean, I don't know the solution to that besides bringing all that, findings to the board like your group does. But I mean, I need.
Well, that's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, we named our organization Racial Justice Now to be bold and say we are going to talk about race. I don't care.
It's good.
We're going to deal with it. And as from a parent's perspective, I've always had to fight that. I mean, people are shocked. They think you're calling them racist or whatever. And what I'm doing is I'm pointing out the pattern of behavior. That you just so well described. I mean, this was the same situation that my son had. He was one of only 2 African-American children in this preschool, and just happened that him and the other African-American child was always being identified, was always being targeted. And we have to force it. We have to be courageous. You know, we have to force this conversation, whether people are comfortable with it or not, whether people want to talk about it or not. I think it takes courageous people like, you know, yourself, myself, and others to just continue to talk about this. I mean, now I think it's sort of being forced into the public sphere, and now we have this because of the events that happened in Ferguson. But we've been living with this like for forever. Like, I was born, you know, in the 80s, so I've been living with this as long as I can remember. You know, and now we're talking about this with larger groups of people, and we're bringing it back to the forefront. So I think that's my time. I can take one more question. One more question?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, in the same brethren of what the gentleman here was saying, to answer him here in the back, as he was speaking to how it relates to standardized testing, I would just like to say that you can't teach the children, let alone love the children, if you're afraid of the children, right? Come on now. So, and more on, why is it that our children have to go through metal detectors and get patted down to get into the school, but nobody's stopping them from leaving the school? This is what we're talking about pushing black and brown youth out of the K-12 school system, okay? And to answer his question to the implicit bias of black on black, as you referenced the 30% number, is Carter G. Woodson said in Miseducation of the in the Miseducation of the Negro that black folks were being socially indoctrinated rather than educated.
That's right.
Right? And then the last thing that I would like to say, if you ever seen the documentary Waiting for Superman, it says that people are under the misconception that failing schools are the result of failing neighborhoods, when in reality, failing neighborhoods are the result of failing schools. Once again, people are under the misconception that failing schools are the result of failing neighborhoods, when in actuality, failing neighborhoods are the results of failing schools.
That's very true. Definitely. And here in the state of Ohio, I mean, we have our Ohio Supreme Court who's ruled on 4 separate occasions that the way we fund schools is unconstitutional. We fund schools by property taxes. To me, that's like a setup. Like, we know what's happening. We know exactly what's happening. So Dayton's property taxes is much lower than that of Oakwood or Centerville or whoever else. And we know that as a community. We know that as the state. We know that. Our legislators know that. But nobody's doing anything about it. I think we need to deal with why is that. Is it because most African American children live in our urban ghettos, live in our urban schools? I mean, we just got to start dealing with this in a very real way. I mean, we perpetuate, like he said, you know, this idea that, you know, failing schools are the results of failing neighborhoods, when it's the opposite. I mean, and we can even deal with why the neighborhoods are, there's so much history. I mean, there's just not enough time for me to continue to go on and on, man. I mean, there's just a lot that we could really deal with. I mean, he's bringing up, you know, Carter G. Woodson. I mean, the Miseducation of Negro is a classic. If you've never read it, you should.
How can we get in touch with you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sorry. I had brochures. We walked right out the door and forgot them. I'm Zakiya Sankara-Jabar with Racial Justice Now. Our website is racialjusticenow.org. And again, I'm also a part of the National Dignity in Schools campaign. We are a national organization. We're the only grassroots organization here in the state of Ohio that's a part of this national campaign. And like I said, we're working specifically right now with Dayton Public Schools, and we're working to organize the state and the other urban 7 school districts in this state. And you can get all of my information from the website as well. One more question and then
just a statement. I grew up in a middle class neighborhood. I grew up in Fairfield, Princeton, and Springdale, pretty middle class. But I always had to be aware of my surroundings. There are certain areas like Indian Hill I can't go part of. Like, I'm not gonna stop, just by reasonable suspicion. But also in the other times I've been blessed every day that the family supports me, everything, and the words that you have said are very uplifting and helpful, and I will take them to heart to the day I die. Thank you, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.